Zionism. Zionism is Jewish nationalism, or it's one form of Jewish nationalism. All right? There are going to be other Jewish nationalisms that will be born in the late 19th, early 20th century, but Zionism is the Jewish nationalism that is ultimately going to result in a Jewish nation state. All right? So the Zionist movement is a movement for Jews to have a homeland of their own, but a homeland of their own in the land of, for the Jews, Zion or Palestine, the region of the Ottoman Empire known as Palestine. The word Zion within Zionism comes from Mount Zion, which is essentially where today the Temple Mount is. So it's like a return of Jews to their biblical homeland in Palestine. Now, to talk about where Zionism comes from, first we want to remember that this is taking place in the late 19th, now very early 20th century, where nationalism is running high for people around Europe, all right? And we talk in my classes about two different types of nationalism. There's that nationalism of Frenchmen, or nationalism of Germans, or American nationalism that says, I'm an American, I've got a country, I love my country. I'm a Frenchman, I've got a country, I love my country's the best. And then there's nationalisms for other people, yes sir. There's nationalisms for other people that might not have a nation state of their own. And like in the lead up to World War I, for example, we would have talked about the Bosnian Serbs, who felt a nationalism towards Serbia, and they wanted to be a part of a Serb nation. But they, unfortunately for themselves at the time, were a part of Austria-Hungary. And so they didn't enjoy the same sense of national pride that Frenchmen got to enjoy. We talked in this class about Vietnamese nationalism, right? Where Ho Chi Minh in 1919 is going to go to France to advocate for Vietnamese nationalism, that the Vietnamese people should have a nation of their own. But the Vietnamese people, or the Serb people, or the French people, or the German people are very different from the Jewish people in the sense that all of those previous people are on the land that they think should be their national home. Frenchmen's national home happens to be where a bunch of French people live. Serbians' national home happens to be where the Serbs live. German national homelands are right where the Germans live. Vietnamese national homeland is right where Vietnamese live. But the Jews are scattered throughout Europe. And this goes back to the diasporic days of the Roman Empire. Remember when the Roman Empire smashed the temple and the Jews spread out? Well, 2,000 years later, we've got Jews scattered throughout Europe. Now, this is just a map of Europe. Mind you, there are also Jews in the Middle East. There are Jews in North Africa. There are Jews in Arabia. But the majority of Jews in the world are living in Europe at this time. And the majority of European Jews are Eastern European Jews. And that should make some sense, right? Because when you, flee here, people head north. It's a little harder to get over to this part, right? Anyway, so you look at this map, and we can see where pockets of Jewish population were in 1880. This map is from 1880. And the vast majority of Jews are in Eastern Europe. The largest population of Jews in Eastern Europe, they're Russian Jews. All right? And then you've got a lot in Poland, but Poland didn't actually exist in 1880, so those are kind of like Russian or German Jews as well. And then you've got a lot of Jews in Germany. You've got a lot of Jews in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. All right? So that's primarily where the Jewish population is. And then you've got smatterings of Jewish populations in other countries. Notice Spain down here. Hardly any Jews living in Spain. Remember the other day we mentioned in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. In 1492, Spain forcibly removed the Muslims and the Jews, right? So not a lot of Jews left in the Iberian Peninsula. In the late 19th century, things are going to start getting bad for a Jewish population in Europe that has always had it to some degree bad. All right? We're not going to get into 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, but let's just understand really quickly that Jewish populations have always been a minority population in the communities that they live in or in the countries that they live in. And not only are they a minority population, and human beings typically haven't done well with minority populations, and today we still work on some issues with this, even in the United States, of course. Human beings don't do well with minority populations. They also have a problem with minority populations that don't assimilate very well into the majority culture, right? To assimilate means to become like the rest of the culture. Well, Jews, they're a little bit different. Their religion is different. Their dietary restrictions are different. Observant Jews would wear different types of clothing than the non-Jews in their community. There's some language differences, right? The Jewish Torah, the holy book of the Jews, is in Hebrew. Most Jews of Central Europe and Eastern Europe are going to be speaking Yiddish, in addition to whatever other language they speak in their community. Yiddish is kind of like an amalgamation of Hebrew and German, all right? So they're just different, right? They're kind of on the outside. And then they're also living amidst Christian populations. And for 2,000 years, Jews have been persecuted because of the connection to the execution of Jesus by the Romans, but it was ultimately supported by the Jewish priests of Jerusalem to get rid of Jesus. Now, this always struck me as odd, and I'm not going to get into this too deep today. It always struck me as odd, because would there be Christianity without the suffering and the death of Jesus? No. So Christians for the last 2,000 years should be like giving high fives to the Jews of Jerusalem for helping their religion get a head start, right? For getting their religion going, because the whole death of Jesus needed to be done for Christianity to exist. But that is lost on a lot of passion plays, for example, that took place over the next 2,000 years that had as the criminals in the plays, the bad guys in the plays, the Jews of Jerusalem. So anyway, Jews are going to suffer from some pretty harsh persecutions, and those persecutions are worse where the Jewish populations are greatest. In the 1880s, what was bad gets worse for the Jews, especially the Jews of Russia. In 1881, the Tsar of Russia, a guy named Alexander, is going to get assassinated. An anarchist blows him up. The Tsar of Russia gets assassinated. And there's political turmoil in Russia, which is the most autocratic state on the planet, or certainly most autocratic European state in the 1880s. And in an attempt to hold on to control of the state, the Russian state, the Tsar, is going to sanction attacks, violence, riots against the Jews of Russia. Because if we can get the Russian people to just be angry with the Jews and allow them to break Jewish homes and break Jewish businesses and break Jewish synagogues and in some cases break Jews, it would divert their attention away from the government. Yes?
Isn't that what Hitler was doing?
Yes. Absolutely. The Jews became a scapegoat for the problems of Russia. Yes?
Did they just randomly pick the Jews, or was
No, well, the Jews were long hated. You can use the people's anger and frustration that they already have with Jewish population.
The guy who assassinated the Tsar, was he Jewish?
He was an anarchist. I don't know if there's any connection. But he was not a religious Jew. He was not a religious Jew at all. It was just frustration. And hey, let's have them take their anger out on this population that we don't care much for. So in the 1880s, we begin to get a pretty dramatic push for Jews in Russia to get the heck out of Russia, because things were bad and now they're getting worse. And the vast majority of Jews that are going to get out of Russia head to the West. They head to Western Europe and they head across to America. Because this is conveniently happening at the exact same time that the United States is entering the global scene and saying, hey, anybody need a job? Anybody? Eastern Europeans? Cool, we'll take you. Southern Europeans, Italians, we'll take you. Polish people? Cool. Russian Jews? Cool. Come to America, we can put you to work. The vast majority of Jews that will leave Russia during the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s are going to go west and make their way to the United States. When you were little kids, you might remember an old movie from the 80s about a little mouse who wanted to escape the horrors of Russia. His name was Fievel, and he was starred in a movie called An American Tail. You guys remember this movie, or am I making things up for you? Fievel and his family, what you didn't recognize when you were like 9, Fievel and his family, they were a Jewish mouse family. And they were being persecuted in Russia. The cats of Russia were beaten down on the Jews of Russia, and they wanted to get out of town. And they went to America because they were told that there were no cats in America, and the streets were paved with cheese. Why would a mouse want gold? There's no cats in America, and the streets are paved with cheese. And of course, they're going to go to America. And they're going to step off the boat. And they're going to recognize as they look under their feet that there's no cheese. And as they look around the community, there's a lot of cats. Right? And this is problematic. And this brings us to the next part of our Zionist story. This is Theodore Herzl. Theodore Herzl is a secular, educated, Western European Jew. He's got a sweet beard, not because of his Jewishness, but because it was the late 1800s and you grew sweet beards. That's what you did. So Theodore Herzl is an educated Western European journalist Jew, and he's living in France. And he's living in France in the 1890s. And while he's in France in the 1890s, this story goes down. This is the story of the Dreyfus Affair. You guys might have heard of this, right? The Dreyfus Affair is the story of a French officer who is accused of treason, accused of passing military secrets to the most dreaded enemy of the French, the Germans. And he happens to be Jewish. And like we unfortunately see sometime in today's America, if a Muslim person commits a crime in America, too many Americans are willing to point their finger at all Muslims. Well, in the 1890s in France, because Dreyfus was a Jew, many Frenchmen began to point their fingers and suspicions at all Jews in France. And anti-Semitism went on the rise in France. Now, there wasn't supposed to be anti-Semitism in France. France was supposed to be beyond this, because they were a more advanced, civilized nation. It was the kind of place that Theodore Herzl himself could make a tremendous living. And there were many other Western European Jews who could enter into business and make vast fortunes and become educators and become intellectuals and live their lives as regular Frenchmen or regular Germans or regular Britons. There wasn't this distinction that you happened to be Jewish. But with the Dreyfus Affair, anti-Semitism is going to be on the rise. And Theodore Herzl is going to recognize that even in France, that's supposed to be modern, even in France, where we're supposed to be assimilated and accepted into culture, we're still different. And if something like the Dreyfus Affair happens, we get targeted again. And he's going to write, and you guys read it in his pamphlet, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, right? He's going to write that we could go anywhere, right? But what does he write in his pamphlet? He says, wherever we go, what's going to happen? The persecution will follow us. Theodore Herzl says, and you guys read it last night, that the seeds of anti-Semitism are being taken to the West by Jews themselves. As Jews arrive in America, you can think America right now is going to be some forward-thinking place because there's not persecution of the Jews. Well, just wait until the Jews arrive, and then the persecution will follow. That the Jews themselves are taking with them the seeds of anti-Semitism. And so Theodore Herzl and others that supported him began to look elsewhere for a homeland for the Jews. And they began to look for a new national homeland. Not moving to someone else's country. Because if you move to someone else's country, you'll just be persecuted there eventually. So they needed for themselves a national homeland of their own. The Jews needed for themselves a national homeland of their own. And they saw as a possible national homeland, the land of Palestine, their biblical homeland. Now, Theodore Herzl himself, he was a secular Jew. He wasn't a religious guy. It had no religious connotation for him. But it was a place that was relatively available. It was a place that has historical connections already to the Jewish people. There was already a Jewish community in Palestine. They were known as the Old Yeshuv. Yeshuv means Jewish community. And there had long been a small Jewish community in Palestine. Some of those Eastern European Jews, the place when they fled Russia, some of them already went down to Palestine. But Theodore Herzl and his very wealthy followers and backers in Western Europe began to support a greater movement of Jews to go to Palestine to work to establish a national homeland. All right? This is Zionism. You had a question?
In his letter that we read last night,
Yep.
wasn't the other like Argentina?
There were other options out there. There was a nationalist movement that suggested South America. There was a nationalist movement that suggested Africa. But ultimately, it was Palestine that had not only a historical connection to Jewish people, but it also was more available for Jewish people. It wouldn't be Jews. I can't say it like this. Let me get there in a moment. It's going to be more available for reasons I will mention in a minute. So as we get into the 1890s and early 1900s, we get an arrival into Palestine of more and more and more Jews. There were about 25,000 Jews that lived in Palestine at the end of the 1800s. Most of them are Jews that had long been living in Palestine. That's a small number, right, guys? Like if you see 25,000 people piling into Michigan Stadium, that stadium looks empty. It's not that many people, right? We have more than 25,000 students in Utica schools. So 25,000 people in like a nation is not that much, right? 25,000 Jews. By the end of the 1800s, that number is up to about 50,000 Jews, a doubling of the population. And in the early 20th century, with more encouragement and more support from outside groups like wealthy Jewish Western European benefactors, giving money and aid for poor Eastern European Jews to move to Palestine, more and more Jews will start to arrive. Now the question is, where are they going when they're there? Well, now we connect it to what we talked about the other day. What was the Ottoman Empire up to in the 19th century? Reform. They were weak, so they were reforming. And one of their reforms was a series of land reforms, where they commoditized their land. They turned the land into land that was owned by people, right? Because that would make it easier to collect taxes. Easier to collect property taxes when people actually own property and you know where they are, right? And I said as this was done in the late 1850s, 1860s, many Palestinians got land that their families had long been living on. And for one reason or another, some Palestinians sold their land. Maybe people fell onto hard times. If you were a little bit desperate and you needed some cash fast, you sold their land. Maybe some people made poor financial decisions. You guys recognize that sometimes people win $100,000 in the lottery today and by the weekend it's gone? Sometimes people don't make wise decisions with their money, right? So some people in Palestine that had long been there begin to sell their land. And the land might be sold to anybody that's willing to buy it. Well, a lot of the buyers for this land were people from outside of Palestine. Maybe rich Ottomans in Istanbul. Maybe people living in Paris or people living in London that just saw it as a viable investment. This kind of shocked me the other day, but raise your hand if your parents actually own some land in another country today. I know this happened. Holy smokes. 1, 2, 3, 4 of you guys? 5 of you guys? They actually own land in another nation. 6 of you guys? That blows my mind. But that's the same thing. You guys are absentee owners, right? And what could you do? Are there people like living on this land right now or renting it or something like that? What could you do if you wanted? You might be able to go there and say, this is actually my land. Thank you for living here for a while, but your lease is up and we're moving back. It's yours, right? Well, as Palestinian people in the Ottoman Empire had their land now commoditized, they can now sell it. And they sell it to people, just like your families have bought land in other countries. And so you might have people in France or in England or in Istanbul owning a bunch of Palestinian land. And that land, remember we read the quote from Mark Twain the other day about what that land in Palestine was like? Pretty desolate land, not a lot going on there. Wasn't worth a lot, right? But what dictates the value of something in economics? The supply and demand. The interaction of the law of supply and the law of demand. And in the mid-1800s, not a lot of people demanded land in Palestine. But by the late 1800s, early 1900s, demand for Palestinian land will skyrocket, right? Because now you've got thousands of Jews from Eastern Europe that are looking to move somewhere, and now they're going to be given money by wealthy Jews in Western Europe. You guys ever hear of a family named the Rothschilds? The Rothschild family is a wealthy banking family of Western Europe, became one of the wealthiest families of Western Europe. And the Rothschilds became some of the primary benefactors to Jewish groups wanting to move to Palestine. And it was totally legit and legal. Because what did they have to do? They had to buy land. What do you have to do to legally buy land? Find someone that's legally selling land. And you had to buy it from them. And many of these absentee landowners in Istanbul or Paris were more than willing to sell the land that they bought for pennies on the dollar. And now they've made a profit on it, so yay! And so they're selling land to Jewish migrants to move down to Palestine. And these Jewish migrants arrive and they say, hey, Palestinian people, hold on, I got like 3 more minutes. Hey, Palestinian people, you've been working this land for a while. Cool. We're here now. We own this land. But you know what? You can stay here and continue working the land because we need help. There's so few of us. And the Palestinians were like, okay, this is kind of sketchy, but the guy does have a piece of paper, so okay, we'll start paying him rent instead of this guy we used to pay rent, and we'll work for him. Cool. But as we get to the early 20th century, more and more Jews started to arrive. And as more Jews began to arrive, they started to displace, more so, the Palestinians that had long lived there. And now the Palestinians aren't needed for labor anymore because more Jews are arriving who need to work, right? And the Jews begin to create communities in Palestine that are made up of almost exclusively now Jews in land that used to be lived on primarily by Palestinians, but it was legally sold to different groups of people. And now we have a migration of Jews to Palestine. By 1914, of a population in Palestine of about 700,000 people, there's going to be about 60,000 Jews. Still a small minority of the population, less than 10%. But the number is dramatically growing from what it once was. And as the number of Palestinians that are being displaced as Jews move to Palestine, as the number of Palestinians that are losing their livelihoods, their jobs, as more Jews come in, we're going to start to see a rise in Palestinian anger and protest against these newcomers. When World War I comes along, everything is made much worse in Palestine for Palestinians who would hope to hold on to their traditional homelands, and largely made better for Jews who look to have a new national homeland. That's what you're going to read tonight. In your document book, I believe it's pages 11 to 16, I would like you to read 3 documents. One is called the McMahon Letter. It's a letter between a British official and a leader of Islam in Arabia. Then you're going to read the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a deal between Britain and France about the Middle East. And you're going to read the Balfour Declaration, which was a promise from Britain to the Jews. Please read those for our next topic.